Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, November 11th, Veterans Day here in the United States. Larry Johnson will be with us in just a moment on as Russia marches toward victory. Is Kiev sending drones towards Moscow? But first, this.
We're taught to work hard for 35 to 40 years. Save your money, then live off your savings. Unfortunately, there are too many threats undermining the value of our hard-earned dollars. The Fed's massive money printing machine is shrinking your dollar's value. Just the cost of groceries is absurd. Let me be brutally honest. I think the dollar is on its way to being extinct, not just here, but globally. The BRICS nations, led by Russia and China, threaten to remove the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Central banks have been shifting away from the dollar and into gold. And if we go to central bank digital currency, that will not only destroy the dollar, but we will lose our freedom. We will lose our privacy. They can track anything we do. You need to take care of yourself and your family. So here's what you need to do. Immerse yourself in knowledge and information. The writing is on the wall. Now is the time to consider shifting some of your dollars into gold and silver as your bedrock financial asset. Call my friends at Lear Capital, the leader in precious metals, investing for over 27 years. They help me diversify into gold and silver. They can help you too.
Call Lear today at 800-511-4620. 800-511-4620 or go to learjudgenap.com. Larry, welcome here, my dear friend. Before we get into the Kremlin's views of the election of President Trump and whether or not Trump and Putin spoke, the latest news in our area of the world seems to be that Trump has offered the ambassadorship of the to the United Nations to Representative Elise Stefanik, a neocon Zionist. Now, we rejoiced over the weekend when Trump told Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo that they would not be in his administration. He turns around and appoints somebody who may be worse than either of them. What do you think?
Well, I'm still skeptical that it'll go through. He may have made the offer as a way to, boost her image, but the Republicans don't have full control of the House of Representatives yet. So removing someone who won her seat means that if I understand New York state law properly, Governor Hochul could potentially appoint somebody in her stead, and Governor Hochul, I'm sure, would not appoint a Republican. So they've got to take into account the electoral matters. That's number one. Number two, putting her in this position, this is resume building. That's all it is. They see her as a future star of the Republican Party, preparing her for future elections down the road. So they need to give her some foreign policy experience. It's like what they did to George H.W. Bush in the 1970s, where he got a temporary job at the CIA as the CIA director. It was just put on his resume so you can go out and say, I was the CIA director, I was the UN ambassador. Candidly, I don't understand why she would be so eager to get that job, because it's not a powerhouse. You get to meet a lot of interesting people, that's for sure. You get to build up some potentially very good relationships with representatives from around the world. But when it comes to substantive policy, it's going to get done. It's a stalemate. And the UN, if the United States wants to stop something that's going to impose some sanctions on Israel, veto.
Yeah, it's a little odd because at one point the UN ambassador was in the cabinet. That was in the Reagan years, but since then the UN ambassador works for the Secretary of State. Now, she doesn't even know who the Secretary of State will be, but whoever it is will be saying to her, we're voting yes on this, we're vetoing that. And she's basically just a messenger in that respect. But her culture and her attitude about U.S. exceptionalism and U.S. hegemony and her support of the forever wars are right in the John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley camp.
Right. But, unfortunately, I think the majority of Americans are that way. right now trying to get people to step back and, for example, and look at what Israel is doing, not just in Palestine, but in Lebanon and in Syria. And if you try to make the case that Israel is out of control and Israel is actually acting as a terrorist state, you get looked at like you've got three heads, or that you promise that you're going to fly to Mars, but without using any kind of rocket ship.
On the other hand, if she made that argument at the UN, with the exception of the British, she'd be welcomed with open arms.
Yes.
Because we, the Brits and the Israelis, are totally isolated. We're the only ones that don't see this. I say not we, our governments are the only ones that don't see this for what it is, which is a massive, illegal, immoral, unconscionable genocide.
Yeah. That's the problem.
What do you think is the Kremlin's view of Trump's election?
I think they're from Missouri. Show me. You know what? They're going to wait and see. They've heard all the. They've got to be fascinated watching the different machinations going on right now. So what, like what we saw over the weekend, initially the announcement that Pompeo was going to be Secretary of Defense. Well, I said at the time that sounded to me more like Pompeo and his crowd were putting that word out.
Well, you're exactly correct.
Yeah, and to try to pump themselves up, and they ignored what was going on social media. So on social media, they're popping up all these clips of Pompeo, basically siding with Jack Smith about tossing Donald Trump under the bus and saying that Trump was just some sort of celebrity tweeter and that he wasn't a serious candidate. And people have not recognized that Don Jr. has enormous influence with his father in this election cycle. That Don Jr. is probably, in my view, his most influential advisor, because basically Don Jr. was the one who pushed J.D. Vance. Guess what? J.D. Vance is vice president. And there was something posted on X yesterday by this fellow named Dave Smith. And Dave Smith was saying, okay, stopping Pompeo, that was a good start, but we got to make sure that none of these neocons and warmongers get close to the seat of power. And Don Jr. retweeted it saying, 100% agree, I'm on it. So, that should tell us something about where this is headed. And so when you look at the Kremlin's watching this and realizing that just what's appearing in the press, what's going on in the media is not the real story. And they're going to wait till they actually hear from Trump and his team and see what they're actually going to do, because the words mean nothing. It's going to be actions.
The Trump team claims that President Trump and President Putin have spoken since the election. Dmitry Peskov, who's Putin's spokesperson, has denied it.
Yeah.
Is there anything to be read into this?
I don't think that actually came from the Trump team. I believe it's still part of this, let's call it the deep state effort to try to portray Trump as some sort of puppet of Putin, someone who's beholden under the control of the Russians. This is all, look, they're not done trying to smear Trump and trying to prevent him from taking office.
They're probably just at the beginning of their efforts to smear Trump. They got 4 years to try and make his life miserable, as they did during his 4 years in the White House. I'm sure he's prepared for that. I asked Ray this, and his answer surprised me. Do you think that American intelligence is aware of what the Kremlin thinks of Trump's election? Ray says he doesn't think our intel pierces the Russian defenses. What do you think?
No, I agree with Ray. I think we have not had decent penetration of Russian. The goal of the CIA was to recruit people who would be in significant roles in the highest levels of governments, say in Russia and China, so that we would know what they're actually thinking. Not that we could necessarily manipulate them, but that we would actually have intelligence about what were their plans, what were their intents. The book that was written about the history of the CIA over the last 75 years made the point that the CIA never really had any kind of successes at that level. So we've got, and then on top of it, the people that are going in are academics who have been brainwashed into a particular worldview. You don't get embraced anymore in any part of the intelligence community for standing up and saying, you know what, Russia's not our enemy. Russia has changed. It's fundamentally changed. It's not some hidden secret communist empire waiting to spring out and take control of the world. It's a new republic, and it's back in touch with traditional Russian values and the religious values that founded it over 1,000 years ago. They don't get that. And so that, look, Ray and I have been saying all along as this war was unfolding, what was, I think our assessments were far more accurate than anything that was being put out by the intelligence community, up to and including the notion that they accept at face value that the Russians have suffered massive casualties. Again, another provable lie.
Will the intelligence community have any difficulty pivoting from telling Joe Biden everything they think he wants to hear to telling Donald Trump everything they think he wants to hear?
First task for Donald Trump is cleaning house at the CIA, getting rid of the DEI that has taken hold out there. That it is so cleaning up the leadership at the top. Now, who's he going to put in place? The most prominent mentioned name I've heard is Kash Patel. Kash Patel would at least be somebody who's, he was Devin Nunes' guy on the House Intelligence Committee, and when I went to warn Devin about what was going on as far as the effort to smear Trump, this was in March of 2017. He turned that investigation over to Kash Patel at the time, and the rest was sort of history. As Nunes became a target himself of the deep state. So Kash knows how the system works. He knows how it's corrupt. He would be somebody that would be in a position to try to change it. But this is a big bureaucracy, and these people, they've got the nice thing with CIA though is if you're caught doing anything that has raised questions about your misuse of your security clearance, they can get rid of you right away. You don't have the normal civil service protections that somebody working at Health and Human Services would have.
Your mention of Nunes and Patel in 2017, of course, brought a smile to my face.
Yeah. Did anything happen back then? I'm trying to remember.
God, it's when the deep state came after you and me because we warned the world that they were spying on Trump and using their British cousins to do it. They tried to make us out to be crazy, and eventually 4 or 5 of the Brits admitted it. Those were the days, Larry.
Yeah.
What is the latest in Ukraine? It appears that the Russians are ramping up their march towards Kiev, and it appears that Kiev sent drones to Moscow over the weekend.
Yeah, they made their largest attempt to attack Moscow with drones, and the Russians shot them down. There was no significant damage at all in Moscow. But this is a desperation play on the part.
This is not militarily significant, right? This is just trying to taunt the public. Oh, your apartment building is going to be attacked by a drone.
Right. And but the Russian air defense proved capable of taking them down. Well, what's fascinating is there was an exchange. The Russians and Ukrainians exchanged cadavers, dead soldiers. For every 15 dead Ukrainians, the Russians got 1 dead Russian back. In other words, that's the rate at which the Ukrainians are being killed. I posted at sonar21.com last night a brief video that shows a trench in Kursk just filled with Ukrainian bodies, and we're not talking 1 or 2. I mean, dozens. So what's taking place is the offensive by Russia is accelerating, and it's accelerating all along the front. And they're moving according to the plan of the general staff. Once they surround, they're in the process right now of preparing the battlefield to surround, envelop Pokrovsk, which has been a critical logistics center for the Ukrainians. But the Russians have made particular advances over the last week in the very southern part of Donetsk. So they're in a position that they very well could end up clearing Donetsk entirely, maybe by the end of December. And why that's important is that's where the bulk of the Ukrainian army is. So it is, Ukraine does, they can't change the dynamic. And the dynamic is this: they do not have enough manpower. They're losing them. They don't have a means to train them. And even if they get them trained, the supply of equipment available for them is very limited. So, if you're fighting a war, those are the last three things you want to have going against you, because that means you won't be able to fight.
Here's, the Biden administration has 70 days left, and it's clear from Matt Miller, the spokesperson for the State Department, as goofy as he is, and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, as neocon as he is, that they are going to put everything in the pipeline out to Ukraine. We don't even know what the number is, but it's many billions that Congress has authorized and that the Biden administration has yet to ship there. So here's Matt Miller on rushing money to Ukraine before the end of Joe's term. Cut number one, Chris.
Trump has been critical of Biden's assistance for Ukraine. Is it true, rushing billions of dollars to Ukraine before the transition?
Yeah, we've been quite open about that the money that was appropriated in the supplemental, that we intend to do everything in our power to get all of that deployed to Ukraine before the end of the year. Before the end of the term.
And before you respond, here's Jake Sullivan yesterday on one of the Sunday talk shows saying effectively the same thing. Cut two, Chris.
President Biden made clear when President Zelensky was here in Washington a couple of months ago that we would spend all of the resources that were provided to us by the Congress on time and in full, meaning that by January 20th, we will have sent the full amount of resources and aid to Ukraine that Congress has authorized. And of course, President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to the Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe. And ultimately, as the Japanese prime minister said, if we walk away from Ukraine in Europe, the question about America's commitment to our allies in Asia will grow.
There won't be much left from which to walk away at this rate. Will there, Larry?
No, what they're talking about is that Congress appropriated that $60 billion, I think it was. Well, they didn't sit down the next day and write out a check and send that money to Zelensky. And the other element is a lot of that money was actually appropriated or designated for the production of some weapons that the United States was not in a position to actually flip a switch and start producing. So it remains to be seen that even with this rush to try to spend all that money that has been allocated for this purpose, whether they'll actually be able to get any weapons that Ukraine could use. But this notion that Donald Trump's going to come in and negotiate a settlement in 24 hours, I think the Russians will present him with a fait accompli. They will have already taken so much territory that they're in the driver's seat. Trump will not be in the driver's seat on this. He's not going to have any leverage in negotiation, because to ultimately have to be in control and dictate the direction of a negotiation, you got to hold some, pardon the pun, Trump cards.
Right.
And in this case, Trump, this is the only time that Trump won't have any Trump cards to play in this game.
Do you think that Putin will accelerate the movement of the military because Trump won, because they want this over with by January 20th?
No. The Russians, I believe, are not conducting this war by looking over their shoulder, worrying what are the Americans going to do. I think they've already reached the point that they've accepted the fact that America is at war with Russia in a de facto sense by virtue of providing intelligence, providing weapons, providing funding, and in some cases even providing mercenaries or CIA personnel behind the scenes. So Russia's not looking at this and, oh, we don't want to make U.S. more angry, or we think the U.S. is, because right now, when they're looking at the Biden administration, they recognize that the Biden administration is committed to escalating up to the point of nuclear war. They've avoided taking that step and going beyond that. And I think, if anything, the Russians recognize that Donald Trump really at heart is not one to try to start a new war. That's what he ran on. And I don't think that was just campaign rhetoric, something to say out while you're at a rally. It was it was reflected in his first term. The problem in his first term, as we've talked about, Trump sabotaged himself by being surrounded by these neocons, from the Mike Pences to Mad Dog at the Pentagon, to John Kelly, the chief of staff, to John Bolton, and just down the list. So this time, I know for a fact that they're not falling for that again. Okay, they've learned that lesson. So when the Russians take stock of this, they may be hopeful that they'll finally have a reasonable partner. But I also think they recognize that the entire effort to portray Trump as a Russian agent was designed to tie Trump's hands so he could not negotiate with Russia, because any effort to negotiate would be seen as a surrender, a concession that was obtained through coercion.
How do you think the elites in Europe, the people that run the EU and the people that run NATO, have privately reacted to the overwhelming victory of Donald Trump? I know you, Larry, and you wish you were a fly on the wall to hear their private reactions. But what do you think their fears and anxieties are?
Watching what happened in the wake of the election last week, I thought I was watching a rerun of the gymnastics competition at the Olympics in Paris. All of the backflips that were taking place, it was incredible. You had people like Lammy, David Lammy, the foreign minister of the UK. He had called Trump a KKK racist and a Nazi supporter. I mean, he tweeted that out. It was 2 years ago. And now all of a sudden he's going, "Oh, Donald, oh, man, we love you. Can't wait to work with you." Well, Trump remembers that kind of stuff. Keir Starmer, there he was. He sent Labor Party members to the United States. Open interference, meddling in U.S. politics by a foreign government to campaign for Kamala Harris. Good call there, Starmer. Now all of a sudden he said, "Oh yeah, no, we've got to have a warm relationship with Washington." Trump recognizes these guys are a bunch of snakes, but more importantly, they don't have any resources. What do they bring to the table? They don't bring manufacturing capability. They're not producing modern weapons. They're not leaders in technology. They're not pumping oil and gas. They're not producing food. They're actually like that clingy relative you might have that is always broke and needs money. That's the Europeans.
Fascinating stuff, Larry. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And we'll see you at the end of the week with the youngster McGovern.
I'll be there.
Okay. All the best. Have a great week, my friend.
Thanks.
Fascinating interview. These are very, very exciting times here in the U.S., whether you're happy with the outcome of the election or not. Coming up for the remainder of today at 4 o'clock, Scott Ritter. And at 5 o'clock, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.